This welcome can be taken in the form of singing, which I won't be doing any singing. I know I got gifted with singing, I won't dare try it. There's no smoking ceremony because I'll probably set all the alarms off. And there'll be no dancing. I think I'm gone from those days of dancing. So as custodians, and we welcome the wider community. The elders or the representatives will give their blessing to this event tonight as the meeting or the occasion in response. The host, the key speaker, will acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities by paying respect to the elders of the past, present and emerging. I would like to pay my respect to our elders. I'm 75 and I'm still working. I have 3 jobs. I'm actually one of the, it's not about me, but I like to share that because I come from a family of 7 boys, 4 girls, mum and dad in a 3-bedroom home in Longman. We lived there for 37 years. We came out of the ex-army huts from the Second World War when I was 5 years of age. But you know, most of my life I was brought up in a black family, and my families are many shades of colours. And yeah, so I was brought up there, and mum and dad never ever told us our history of our Aboriginality. And it's like 55 years later, I found out that sitting in the archives was my great-great-grandmother. She was the Queen of Childers, Apple Creek, came from around Maryborough, the Mary River, and lived on a station west of Maryborough, which was Warra Station, W-A-R-R-A, Warra Station, and worked up there on with her husband. And he was an Englishman. She was a full-blood Aboriginal woman, and he had 2 boys and a girl. Yeah, so I come down my great-grandmother's line and under the Blackman family. So yeah, to find out that my great-great-grandmother was my apical, my descendant. So that's who I represent today on the current native title under Gubby Gubby. And just to let you know, like we can't become directors, we can't become applicants unless we can prove that we are Aboriginal. And lucky enough that we found all our documentation sitting in the archives hidden away. And it's about 36 pages of my family history. So I was all excited about that because yeah, it was never to be put in front of us. But I just want to say thank you because, you know, today it's a different world. People are a lot different. You know, today we're working together as one. And I love that because without you guys and girls and the work that you do, you know, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't go forward. By working together, we can go a long way. We can work together and go forward and have positive outcomes and make our community safe in all areas. So I think that might wind me up, and I want to give the blessing of our Cubby Nation people on this meeting here tonight, and the ancestors that watch over us and are with us, and our sacred spot. You know, we've got sacred sites here from Bribey Island over to the Bora Rings to women's place, birthing places, and today we acknowledge the LORE of our elders of the past and present. So we don't go anywhere where the women gave birth to their babies, and women are not allowed to go anywhere to the sacred places of the men, like boring rings. But if you want to disobey that, then yeah, I wouldn't advise you to, or your kids, if you see them running over our sacred sites, over the boring rings, it'd be best that you round them up and get them out of there, because if you're picking them up, you won't be going home on your own. You'll have some visitors in the back of your vehicle, and then you'll have to come and get us to smoke them out of your house. All right. So, Rick, thank you for inviting me here on this special occasion tonight, and I welcome you all here. And yeah, so thank you very much for having me. Thanks.
Thank you for that beautiful welcome to country, Uncle Mick. I want to acknowledge acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight, the Kabi Kabi people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge the Federal Court's determination this past week, which recognises the Kabi Kabi people's unbroken connection with our area. And I want to pay credit to Uncle Mick and the other traditional owners who were involved in that claim. I know a huge amount of effort has gone into that determination. Until a few weeks ago, my role was Chief of Staff for the Queensland Minister for Resources and Critical Minerals, and it was his job to sign the Indigenous Land Use Agreement on behalf of the state of Queensland that's related to that determination. And he had to physically sign the hard copy, which was this thick, printed double-sided. So, and that's just for part A of the claim. I know there's still parts B and C to go, but I want to pay credit to the huge amount of work that Uncle Mick and the other traditional owners put in over many years to make that determination happen. As President of the Longman Federal Organising Council, I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight to hear from Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Senator Anthony Chisholm. I would like to acknowledge that we have with us here tonight Ali King, the State Member for Palmerstone and Assistant Minister for Housing, Local Government, Planning and Public Works, Zach Beers, Assistant State Secretary of Queensland Labor, and Josh Milroy, the Queensland Director of the Transport Workers Union. I'd like to thank everyone from the Longman Federal Organising Council who helped with the planning for tonight's event. There's too many people to thank individually, but I would like to give a special shout out to Lynn Rushby, our Secretary. It was her very big contribution which made tonight's event possible. For those who aren't familiar with what a Federal Organising Council is, it's a bit like a Labor Party branch, except it applies to the whole electorate of Longman, and every member who lives in Longman is automatically a member of the Federal Organising Council. And it's responsible for coordinating activities for the electorate of Longman between election campaigns. And I'm very proud to have to be the president of the Federal Organising Council since it was reconstituted a bit under a year ago, and to be working with members from all of our branches to help elect a Labor member at the next federal election. It's fantastic to have our Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers here with us tonight as guest speaker, and you'll have the opportunity to ask him questions after he speaks as part of a question and answer session. There are 77 other local MPs in the Federal Labor Caucus, and I know they'd all love to have Jim visit their electorate, so it's very generous of Jim to give up his time to be here with us tonight. Jim has a lot of experience dealing with economic policy matters, having previously been Chief of Staff to then Federal Treasurer Wayne Swan. I also worked for then Treasurer Wayne Swan for 5.5 years, and I worked with Jim for most of that period. It was a very eventful period in Labor history, which included the global financial crisis, and our economic response kept Australia out of recession, and also reforms like the National Disability Insurance Scheme and record increases in funding for hospitals and schools. Fast forward a bit more than a decade later, and today the economy and jobs continue to be the #1 issue for voters. However, the Australian economy now faces very different challenges. In this difficult economic environment, it's fantastic that we have the Albanese Labor government helping working families and protecting our most vulnerable with tax cuts, cost of living relief, and getting real wages moving again. In addition to national reforms like cheaper childcare, fixing aged care, and taking real action on climate change, the Albanese government is also making a real difference for our community with local election commitments like reopening the Morayfield Minor Accident and Illness Centre. In its first year since reopening, the Morayfield Centre has already provided urgent care for more than 38,000 presentations. And just this week, work started on the Bruce Highway with new entry and exit ramps at Marumba Downs. This follows Federal Labor's election commitment to invest more than $780 million to widen the Bruce Highway from Marumba Downs to Burpengary. And I heard Jim got stuck in traffic tonight, so he saw firsthand why that election commitment is so important. But we know how hard it is to get the message out about all the great things that Labor is doing with the continuing influence of the Murdoch press and right-wing social media. That's why it's so important that we have Jim Chalmers, one of our best communicators, in the critical Treasury portfolio. But it's also why everyone in this room is so important, because the Labor Party's greatest strength has always been our members. And we need you to help get the message out to the people in our community about how it is only Labor governments that help working families and protect our most vulnerable, while the LNP and Peter Dutton continue to push their negative and divisive policies. It's also great that we have here with us tonight Senator Anthony Chisholm. Senator Chisholm spends a lot of time travelling around our state and our country in his role as Assistant Minister for Education and Assistant Minister for Regional Development. But he's also a regular visitor to Longman, having come to our first meeting of the Federal Organising Council in Centenary Lakes in August last year, as well as being guest speaker at our event at Bribie Island. And in addition to that, he also makes regular media appearances in Longman. And it's great that we can hear from him again tonight.
Thanks very much, Beck. It's a real honour to be here, and I wanted to acknowledge Uncle Mick as well. And I saw that news during the week, and I didn't know that Uncle Mick was going to be here, but I think that awarding of native title deserves a round of applause. So, well done. Really significant. A fantastic achievement and something that I'm sure you're incredibly proud of. I wanted to thank Beck for organising tonight, and also to my great friend Lynn up the back who's given me a wave. Thanks, Lynn. I really appreciate it, and I'm very fortunate to be a senator and representing branch members as part of Queensland Labor. But the one thing that we found, there's only 3 senators and there's a lot of non-held seats in this state. So myself, Nita and Murray as your Senate team, we really appreciate when branch members get together and give us the opportunity to come and talk to you, because it means that we can catch up with a lot of people at the same time. So I've really enjoyed being able to get around the tables and have a chat to people, hear what's happening in the local community as well, which is really important. I wanted to give a shout out to Ali King as well, who I can't actually see now, but I did see at the back. She's still up the back there. Good to see you. And also Zach from Party Office, good to see Zach, and Josh from the TW. And the TW are doing a great job in Queensland, but also nationally in influencing the work of the federal government, particularly when it comes to gig workers and the way that they've been treated. So thanks to the TW and Josh for the work that they've been doing and working with us. I'm not going to talk for long because I want to hear from Jim, but I also want to see Jim handle the tricky questions while I get to sit there and watch him do that, because he's so good at it. But I just wanted to give a few reasons as to why I'm optimistic about the next 12 months. And let's face it, when we get together in 12 months' time, we will have had a state election and we would have had a federal election by the time that runs around. And there's no doubt that when you look at the politics that we face around this country and around the world, that every election is really, really hard. And there's no doubt for the state government that being in power for almost 10 years, that their election is going to be a really tough one. But the best thing that we can do locally is dig in, back in Ali and our other state members, and really hope for the best possible result that we can get. But then within a few months of that, we'll be into the federal election campaign. And we obviously want to be returned because we know the only way you can change the country is by having a long-term Labor government. But we also know that's not easy. The last time, I was going to say that's not easy under Albanese, but hopefully it is easy under Albanese. But what we know is that the challenges that we're facing, it's only a Labor government that are actually going to deal with those in the best interests of working people and those who are vulnerable in our community. And the reason that I'm optimistic about why we can prove that to the electorate over the next 12 months before we get to that election is, and I think that this is a reason why I'm optimistic that we can win Longman back as well, is that when we go to this election campaign, we're going to have a track record. So we can actually point to people and say, this is what we've done. Whereas in the last campaign, and I know that Beck and the team worked really hard, but it was saying, this is what we hope to do, or this is what we will do, but we didn't have a track record that we can point to. But when we go to that next election campaign, we've got that local track record of promises that we made and promises that we delivered on. And Beck mentioned the Caboolture clinic there, but we also had infrastructure promises, we had sporting club promises, and we've made progress on all of those, let alone the announcements that we've made in the budget around infrastructure at the same time. So I think that when we go to that election, we can actually say, this is what we said we'd do before the last election, this is what we've delivered on, and this is the difference that it's made for the community as well. But I think importantly, we can talk to some of the global issues that we're delivering on as well that points to the track record. I'm sure Jim will talk about the tax cuts where every worker will be getting a tax cut under this government and 90% will be better off. We'll talk about the changes that we've made around urgent care clinics. The work that we're doing in education, whether it be in early childhood, whether it be in schools, whether it be in higher education to make it more affordable and accessible. All of these things that we'll be able to go and build some optimism so that people can go into this next election thinking more brightly about the future, and actually it's the Albanese Labor government that are actually going to get us there. And there's going to be a clear contrast between our optimism and determination and a brighter future versus the negativity and the constant saying no from Peter Dutton. So when I think about the next 12 months, I feel optimistic that we're going to be able to make significant inroads in Queensland. And those two reasons that I identified around our track record, but also the only ones that will be running at this election that will paint an optimistic vision for the future that I think the people of Queensland and the people of Longman will be looking to embrace after going through some really tough stages, and we know that people have been doing it tough. So it leaves me with great hope that we'll be able to make inroads this time, that we'll be in a much stronger position for us to forge ahead in seats like Longman and neighbouring seats as well. And I'm really looking forward to getting behind the campaign that we can do it. One thing I also know is that what is important is to have figureheads and leaders at the top of the government that actually understand Queensland and can also ensure that Queensland is well represented in the federal government. And there's no doubt that Jim has been a shining light for the Albanese government in the way that he's navigated the difficult economic times, the way he's represented us when it comes to his performances in the media and delivering budgets. And it's a real pleasure that I'm able to join him here tonight. And without further ado, please welcome the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and thanks everybody for spending some time together tonight here. I begin by acknowledging that we're on Cubby Cubby country, and I thank Uncle Mick for his characteristically kind welcome earlier on, and I join with Rebecca and Anthony in congratulating you on the important progress that you've made over a long period of time, but especially the culmination of a lot of that work in the last week or so. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Everyone has been acknowledged, but I hope you'll bear with me when I shout out, as Anthony did and Rebecca did, Ali King, the state member, Zach from party office. I'm very, very grateful to Lynn and all of the colleagues on the team of the FOC here in Longman. Thank you for your patience and your perseverance and for working with my colleagues to make sure that we could have this opportunity tonight as well. I wanted to say about Anthony, about Senator Chisholm, just how important it is that we have him and 3 senators from Queensland who understand when you've got so much ground to cover in such a big state, but our representation in the House of Representatives is not as we would like it to be, then the 3 Queensland senators really do much more work per person than is asked of a number of our other senators. And it really gives me heart and gives me faith. You know, as I move around Queensland, and Anthony and I have done thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of Ks now in regional Queensland in particular, it gives me a lot of faith, and it makes me grateful that we've got the 3 senators that we do who take that part of their job so seriously. It's easy if you're a senator to kind of hide on the 30th floor or whatever of some high-rise in Brisbane, as the One Nation senators do. It's a very different thing to be out and engaging with real people in real communities the way our senators do. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind putting your hands together for Anthony Chisholm and his 2 senators. I shout out Josh as well, and our sisters and brothers from the union movement who are here. And I also wanted to, of course, acknowledge my great friend here, Rebecca Fanning. As Rebecca said in her speech a few moments ago, I've known Rebecca for a really long time now. I hired her in Wayne's office. I don't want that to give you the impression that Rebecca worked for me. I felt most days like I was working for Rebecca, but I was very, very proud to have worked with her for such a long period of time through those difficult days working for then Treasurer Wayne Swan, now our National President of the Labor Party. We worked very, very closely together over those 5 and a bit years. And I really couldn't be prouder of Rebecca. I couldn't be a bigger supporter of Rebecca and the contribution that she has made and seeks to make in communities like this one. I am probably Rebecca's biggest supporter, and I'm very proud to be that. And I really wanted to thank her for the opportunity, along with the FOC friends, for inviting me here tonight to say a few words and then, of course, to take some questions. Before I get into making some points to get the conversation started, I also wanted to thank Doug and the great people here from Caboolture High. And I also wanted to apologise that when Sue was rustling me up a cup of white tea a moment ago, we'd run out of milk, and so we borrowed some of the school's milk. And so next time I'm here, if Doug is still here, I'll bring some milk to replenish the stocks that Sue and I pinched from your school fridge. Look, I'm really happy to be here for at least 3 reasons. The first reason I've already touched on, which is to support Rebecca and the efforts of the FOC here in a really important part of the country, important politically, but important economically too, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But that's the first reason I'm really proud to be here. The second reason is because it gives me the opportunity to thank you very sincerely, the branch members, the grassroots, the rank and file, from this part of our party. You know, we ask so much of you, particularly in seats which are federal seats which are marginal, seats which can be difficult to win sometimes, but where we're in the hunt usually, we ask so much of you. And I know I speak for Anthony as well and Zach when I say we really do want to convey to you how much that's noticed in our cabinet, from Anthony Albanese right down to much more junior people like myself and beyond, that all of the work that you do here is noticed, it's seen, it's appreciated, and we know that we wouldn't be anywhere near governing the greatest country on earth were it not for the efforts of our branch members. And so that's the second reason I'm pleased I can be here, so that I can convey that to you directly. I know that there are a lot of branch members here, some newer branch members, but also a lot of people who've been involved in our movement and in our party for a really long time, and I salute every single one of you, and I thank every one of you as well. Now, the third reason is because I think seats like Longman, and which is not that different to where I grew up and where I represent in the Parliament right now. I'm kind of the southern Longman, and the seats around me, seats like Ford and Wright, would be very familiar to a number of you here. It's got a lot of common characteristics. And the reason it's so important that people like myself and my cabinet colleagues spend time here as we seek to win this seat as part of a re-elected Albanese Labor government in Canberra is because I think electorates like this one is where the battle is really going to be joined, you know, the main battle in the next federal election. Of course, we've got a lot of work to do in the state election in about 4 months' time. But as Anthony rightly said, you know, the election will have been won and won by the time we next get together, if it's a year away. And I think federally, seats like Longman is where the battle is joined. We know this because Peter Dutton has more or less given up on the teal seats. He seems to go out of his way each day to antagonise the teal members of parliament and their communities that they are doing a pretty good job representing. In the rural areas, often it's a contest now between National Party members and community independents. And so really you can tell in Peter Dutton's electoral strategy that he wants to join this battle, and we want to join this battle in the outer suburbs of our major cities and in the population centres within an hour or two's drive of the big cities of our country. That is, whether it's the central coast of New South Wales or places like Longman or elsewhere in the country, that is where the battle will be joined in this federal election. I really believe that. And so that's the third reason it's important I'm here with you tonight. It's only been about a little over a month now since we handed down the Commonwealth budget, the third budget of the Albanese government. I acknowledge my friend and my neighbour, Cameron Dick, handed down a terrific state budget only a few days ago. A few weeks before that, there was the Commonwealth budget as well. And our federal budget was really about trying to make sure that we were locking down and funding our key Labor values and priorities in the third budget. And so the budget was really about five things. It was about cost of living help. It was about strengthening Medicare and the care economy. It was about housing. It was about skills in universities, and it was about a future made in Australia. They were the five main themes of the budget that I handed down on behalf of the government in the first half of May. And what that's really done in lots of ways, whether it's in the broader national conversation about our priorities, or whether it's the political contest, at least the Labor LNP contest, it's really kind of smoked out what I think will be the main themes that the next election will be contested on. And you can see in the way, the things that we've done, you can see our Labor values. And if you can see in the response to the things that we are doing, you can see the kind of messed up, warped priorities of our opponents. And there's lots of ways that has become just blindingly obvious now. But if I give you a couple of examples about it, and Anthony mentioned it a moment ago as well. You know, I spent most of the Christmas just gone rewriting those tax cuts, right? And if I made a list of all the things I'm proudest of so far, you know, that would be at, or probably, it would be near or probably at the top of the list I'm most proudest of. And that's because what we were able to do in a really responsible way is to say, okay, we've got these tax cuts coming in, less than 2 weeks now they come in for every single Australian taxpayer. And we sat down at Christmas time, we said we need to give more cost of living help. We've got to do it in a way that doesn't blow the budget. It's got to be really responsible, but it's got to be fairer. It's got to recognise that these cost of living pressures disproportionately are felt in communities like this one, people who are on lower incomes, middle incomes, and on fixed incomes as well. And so when we sat down at Christmas time, sat down with the Prime Minister, we probably spoke 3 times a day for about 3 weeks over that period. And we were able to say, let's take these tax cuts, which are heavily skewed to the people who are already doing really well and good on them. Let's make it so that everyone gets a tax cut, including people on lower incomes who are going to miss out entirely. So we rewrote those tax cuts. Peter Dutton's first response to that was to call for an election over it. He was so furious that we would have the temerity to help people on low and middle incomes in communities like this one. He wanted there to be an election over it. And we know subsequently they capitulated, they voted for it in the Parliament and all the rest of it. But I think that first reaction was really, really telling. They were outraged. Susan Lee said, of course we're going to roll it back. Angus Taylor said he was furious about it. Peter Dutton called for an election about it. And I think that laid bare some of the choices that the Australian people will have to make when the Prime Minister calls the election sometime in the next 12 months. We've also seen it with wages. We've got an inflation challenge in our economy. I'm really upfront about that. Whether I'm asked on the 7:30 show or by Patricia Carvelis on Radio National or on 2GB or anyone, I'm very upfront. We have an inflation challenge in our economy, we do. And we are working night and day to get on top of that challenge, to provide cost of living relief in the most responsible way, to turn those big Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses, to do all the right and responsible things to try and take the edge off this inflation. And the difference there that I wanted to highlight for you tonight is our political opponents in the LNP, they say, well, you can't give a decent minimum wage increase to people on the lowest incomes because that'll make the inflation problem worse. And I find it galling in the extreme to think that our political opponents want to blame the people on the lowest incomes for the inflation challenge that we have in our economy. We don't have an inflation challenge in our economy because people on the lowest incomes are being paid too much, right? And so I think that was illustrative too of the sort of differences that we're contesting in the next election. We have got wages moving again. When we came to office, and I won't give you thousands of numbers tonight, we came to office, real wages were going backwards 3.4%. They're now growing again. Real wages are growing again because inflation's moderating and wages are growing again at the fastest pace they've grown for 15 years since Wayne Swan was the Treasurer, not a coincidence. Right? And so that's a big difference that we're contesting as well. But the third one, and it's very topical, and I've had a number of conversations already on the way in here, in the room tonight. You know, the big difference, the big front that was opened up in the last 24 hours or so, 36 hours of course, is the absolute economic lunacy of Peter Dutton's nuclear road to nowhere. And a lot of people, I think wrongly, but a lot of people, a lot of commentators and analysts over time, they say it's hard to tell the difference sometimes between the major parties, but I've given you a big difference on tax, I've given you a big difference on wages. We've got a different approach to Medicare and the care economy, we've got a different approach on skills, different approach to local communities. But have a look at that massive fork in the road that we've now come to when it comes to energy in this country. It is a genuine fork in the road, and people will have to choose. Now, in our policy suite, and it was in the budget, $23 billion of investments in being a renewable energy superpower so that we can have a future made in Australia and we can make ourselves an indispensable part of the global net zero economy. So our cards are on the table. You know where we're coming from on this, billions and billions of dollars of investing in renewable hydrogen and the critical minerals we'll need for batteries. And all of this investment in research and development, technology and jobs and regional communities and local communities like this one. So you know where we're coming from. You know, we've already got a whole bunch of stuff underway to get this energy transformation right, to get more renewables into the grid. And we're backing that with tens of billions of dollars of investment. And our approach couldn't be more different from what we heard in the last day or two from Peter Dutton when it comes to energy. Now, people have views about nuclear energy and the environment and safety, legitimate views. People have views about nuclear energy from a kind of an ideological point of view. I wanted to tell you about how insane nuclear energy is from an economic point of view. Now, even if you take the politics out of it, the ideology out of it, even if you take the concerns that people raise about safety out of it, even if you take the local politics out of having reactors in local communities. Just for one moment, and all of those things might be important, just focus for a moment on the economics. Why would we choose as a country the option which costs the most, which takes the longest to build, which pushes up energy prices the most, which is least reliable in the interim, and which squanders this incredible combination, unique combination of advantages that we have as a country? You'll hear our opponents say other countries go down the nuclear road. Well, other countries don't have our geological, geographical, geopolitical and meteorological advantages. They all want those. They want the combination that we have, but not everybody has that. And it would be disastrous if we turned our back on that in economic terms. We've got these big economic and industrial opportunities before us, and it would be unforgivable if we turned our back on those. And so because Peter Dutton wants to create a point of political differentiation, he's gone for the more expensive thing that takes longer and that wastes our national opportunities. And so he's been getting people in the press to write how important, how much he wants to have this argument with us. Nothing would make me happier than to prosecute this argument over the next 6 or 12 months. We're on a winner here. And his approach is mad. Now, he wants people to believe that he will get power prices down in the mid-2020s by building reactors in the mid-2030s at the earliest. He wants to think that the economics of nuclear is so compelling, but he can't tell us how much it would cost. I mean, I dabble in these sorts of issues from time to time. The idea that you can determine whether the economics of something are compelling without knowing how much it will cost, I mean, that's cuckoo stuff. That is mad stuff. And so that's another area where there's an important differentiation. Now, I genuinely believe, and I know I've been going for a little while now and people will have questions, I genuinely believe that one of the reasons why the stakes are so high in this federal election, the state election too, but in the federal election as well, is really two reasons. One, people are under such pressure right now that we can't leave them to fend for themselves. You know, our reason for being as a Labor Party, one of our reasons for being as a Labor Party is because we don't believe in a dog-eat-dog society where people are left to fend for themselves and people are under pressure. That's why we're there for them. In all these ways, we're helping cheaper medicines, rent assistance, help with student debt, tax cuts, energy bill relief, expanding paid parental leave and paying super on it. All of these things that we're doing is because our values tell us, demand of us, that we don't leave people to fend for themselves when they're under pressure. And so that's one reason why the stakes are high. But the other one is a generational challenge. And Nora and I were talking about this before on the way in. You know, there are real generational consequences for getting the 2020s wrong. You know, I feel like in the same way that people look back in our history, the 1930s, the early 1940s, you know, every once in a while there's a generation that has an outsized impact on the prospects of a country. And I genuinely believe that we're in the midst of a defining decade. That the 2020s, we'll look back on them in 20 or 30 years. We'll look back on the 2020s and we'll say, well, that was really where we got it really right, or that was where we got it really wrong. I genuinely believe that. We've had a wasted decade to here, and this is a defining decade now. It's a defining decade when it comes to these intergenerational issues, whether it's energy, whether it's technology, whether it's human capital, whether it's our industrial base, right? And so that's why the stakes are so high in this next election and beyond that as well. And so the last point that I will say, before we get to your questions, is with the stakes that high, and with all of these important differences at play, you know, the idea that we would turn this country over to the most divisive politician of his generation. He makes Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott look like unifying figures. Someone whose party is deeply divided over some of these issues we've talked about today, and who can't provide all these details that we need on some of these key changes that he's proposing. That would be disastrous for Australia. Now, with your help, we've made some good progress the last couple of years, but we don't believe that the job is done. Of course it's not done. And the reason we need another term, and ideally another term after that, is because as Labor people, we don't see periods in office as just points in time. We see them as staging points of progress. And we've made some progress together the last couple of years, but we've got a heap more to do. And we need another term in order to lock down what we've started, and also to make sure that we can continue this country on the right path in the years and the decades ahead. Thanks very much. So we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here.
Okay, hi. I'd like to ask you, and I know I've been you hear about this before, but I'd like to ask you, with the current staffing issue, particularly in health,
Yeah.
but it's also happening in the trades and industry as well, and with the large immigrant population that's being used to fill that deficit, there seems to be quite a problem that seems to be arising that the Liberal business owners aren't unaware of, and even within Queensland Health, the management there are finding a way to use this to their advantage. But we've got people that are being brought from countries where to speak out for one's industrial rights can be fatal to your life, and you can end up in prison or worse. And so these people come from a natural culture of fear, and they're being parachuted into our workforce here, unaware of their industrial rights, and culturally unable to speak up for their rights, and visa security is being waved over their heads.
Yeah.
I mean, I've experienced it personally at a workplace where the staff were actually being made to work a double shift, but being told to clock off after the early, wait an hour, and then clock on for the late, not knowing their industrial rights. And I'm just wondering how we can tackle this so that we're not eroding our hard-won and hard-fought for industrial rights, but at the same time protecting, protecting the workforce.
Totally get it. Thank you. Great question. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we are doing and we need to continue doing on this front. First of all, we need to help the labour movement grow to provide representation for particularly the most vulnerable workers, including workers for whom English might be a second language, or in other ways that they're, as you rightly point out, vulnerable in workplaces. Secondly, we're reforming the industrial relations laws with a particular emphasis on closing the kinds of loopholes that allow employers to treat workers shabbily. And so there's a whole agenda there, working closely with the movement to make sure that we bed that down. In terms of the industries specifically in the care economy, obviously in the care economy we do have a fairly substantial migration program to help with skills shortages in those areas. We are spending a lot of time and effort and a lot of money making sure that the pay is fairer. We began with aged care. There's a big nurses case at the moment. There's an early childhood case before long. And so if you made a list of the kind of 8 or 10 biggest spends of our time in office so far, and I do have that list, so far, wage cases are in that list. So big investments in making sure we can pay people appropriately for the important work that they do. We're also in the visa system. I work closely with Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles to crack down on the exploitation that you refer to. Hanging people's visas over their head is obviously creates an even more substantial power imbalance. And then the last thing that I would say is, and this is again, I could have used it as an example of the way of some of the political differences in the Parliament. You know, we understand that the migration intake overall was high after COVID. You know, the students came back quickly, the long-term tourists came back quickly. And we understand that as that normalises, and we're playing a role in normalising it, so it goes back to more levels we've seen traditionally. We've got to make sure that in doing that, we don't make the skills crisis worse, whether it's in construction, whether it's in transport and logistics, whether it's in the care economy. And so the difference between us and Peter Dutton when it comes to managing the migration program is we're doing it in a considered and methodical way which recognises we need to train more people locally, but there's also a role for skilled workers. And when we get those skilled workers in, we need to make sure that they're treated fairly and paid appropriately.
A question about housing. Like one of my kids.
They want to have
about, like I got one of my daughter's 30. She said to me she's got a nice job, not high paid, but lovely job. She said to me, I said, stay in that job forever. And she said, I'll never get a house. I said, you'll never get a house until the politics changes. And, she just won't. She won't get a look in. And the idea of, increasing first home buyers seems to just push the price of houses up. Is there any notion of trying to shift that culture away from houses as commodities, which came in largely with John Howard, and away from just a house is a house, and it should be far more available, and changing that culture. You look at commercial news, and they'll reflect on house prices rising in different cities, and they see it as a good thing. I think, well, not if you're under 30, you think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you're stuck. My daughter has got bugger all chance of getting a look in unless the politics change. Negative gearing gets the heave ho. You know, I mean, is the 2019 election still scare the daylights with, you know, negative gearing, franking credits, which was just ridiculous. You know, like, you might lose an election if you don't bring in issues on negative gearing in such a short space of time.
Thanks, Phil. So, not going down the negative gearing path because we feel like we found a better way to build a heap more homes. You know, the whole situation that you describe and the intergenerational injustice that you rightly
Why would my
describe.
daughter vote for you?
Because we're going to build a heap more homes so that the vacancy rates aren't effectively zero and so the prices aren't going through the roof. You know, I know that there is a constituency on negative gearing, but we think we've found a whole bunch of ways where we can build a heap more homes without going down that road. We've put $32 billion into 19 different housing policies. And what they are all about, what unites them, is trying to make sure that we can build more homes close to where the jobs are so people can afford to buy them or people can afford to rent them. And I know that you are a good representation that a lot of people would like us to do the policy change that you're describing. I think we found a better way to go about it. Now, you can't click your fingers and build a heap more homes, but you've got to get cracking. And so our goal is to build 1.2 million homes in 5 years. We do that by a whole bunch of ways. There's a social housing part of it, affordable housing part of it. There's housing for people fleeing violence. There's the Help to Buy scheme, there's the rent assistance, there's involving the super funds and the states, there's planning reform, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And that's because we do genuinely recognise the intergenerational injustice of the housing market. We're trying to do something about it. Another key difference here is our opponents say, well, if you let people raid their super, then the problem will be solved. And what we know, and this goes to your point, I think, about the bonus, is that would be a recipe for ensuring that more people are bidding for still fewer houses at auctions and the like. And a lot of people ask me about this super for housing thing. I think a lot of people in our movement are a bit worried that people will be very attracted to it. And to be upfront with you, you know, sometimes you think, I wonder what people really think about that. I'll tell you what people think about it. The first time they hear about it, they have a think about it and they start to think through the consequences. Okay, so first of all, you're telling me that instead of 100 people being at an auction, there'll be 200 people at an auction. Secondly, you're telling me there's nothing in there that will build more homes. And thirdly, you're telling me that my generation has to smash my retirement in order to get a home when your generation didn't have to smash your retirement to get a home. And so I think people think through the intergenerational unfairness of the super for housing thing as well. I don't pretend for a moment, I wouldn't pretend for you, Phil, that we've got every answer to every part of the housing market. But the most important thing I'm supremely confident on, we've got to build heaps more homes in lots of different ways, and that's what we're investing all our billions of dollars in. We'll do you two, and then up the back.
Hey Jim, I'm Janine Aiken.
Hey.
My question, you've slightly answered part of it, but my question is, why are we awarding major infrastructure projects to foreign-owned companies when there are Australian companies that can bid for those things? Concern is obviously, and particularly when they're importing a very temporary workforce.
Yeah. The structure of the infrastructure market's not perfect for us. It doesn't always suit all of our objectives. You know, a lot of the big players, as you rightly point out, are multinationals. What we're trying to do, you know, we meet with the Australian builders a lot and constructors a lot, and what we try and do is work out how do we ensure that they get a slice of the action. You know, there's hundreds of billions of dollars being spent state, federal and local in infrastructure, and we have made some progress in making sure that the Australian companies can get a bigger piece of it. But I do acknowledge that a lot of the work goes to big multinational companies, and that's because the market's concentrated. There's often 2 or 3 companies bidding against each other, and we've got to get value for money in addition to all of these other things. But the other thing I wanted to convey to you, and it got kind of lost a bit yesterday because of the nuclear announcement, but one of the things we announced yesterday as the next step in our Future Made in Australia piece, particularly around energy infrastructure, is that I'm going to legislate community benefit principles in the Future Made in Australia Act. And what that means is, and we've been working closely with the movement and with others, what that means is if we're going to invest or co-invest or provide tax breaks for people to invest in big energy projects in important regions, central Queensland and elsewhere, central Queensland where Zach's from and elsewhere, then we insist on about half a dozen principles. Strengthening the local supply chain, good, secure, well-paid jobs, a whole bunch of other ones, meeting tax obligations and the like. And what that will do is that will give us some leverage, that where this investment is done by a big company, Australian or international, that we are wringing every advantage that we can out of that for the local community they're investing in. Right, there's that. Thanks.
Hi, Jim, everyone. I think this sort of segues in from the gentleman over there is talking about the nature of housing, how difficult it is for young people, and let's face it, has been difficult in the past for older people as well. And on that note, I realised that an ever-burgeoning issue in our nation, let's face it, in many countries, developing countries as well in the world, is homelessness. And this, in this little blue planet of ours, I mean, as a young senior of Bribie Island, I've also experienced personally this situation. And I can tell you, it really, really irks the energy out of you. And when you finally find a place, you go, thank goodness. And then you say, well, where can I get help to find my way through Centrelink, to do this, to get rental assistance? Go to the neighbourhood centre. They're wonderful. They've got volunteers who help out. Centrelink and also through the housing. And you go to them and you say, oh, look, and they do help out. And they did help me out. But I tell you this, I was stunned to some extent because Pat was saying to me, well, you know, I said, oh, you've got vouchers there. Vouchers for food and petrol. And he goes, oh yes, but they're all out the fiscal year. Oh yeah, it's the end of fiscal year. But we don't get very much. And he said, in fact, it's becoming less and less. And I'm thinking, isn't that amazing? Because our homeless becoming more and more. And it's not as if you're just getting a handout. It's literally those who are living it rough. And you see them in their cars. You know, they're not the tourists. They're not the tourists hanging there washing out, you know, towards the Palmerston Passage. No. They're homeless. They're living it rough, sometimes at Red Beach. Sometimes just camp there. And they come in to these centres. And they come in, you know, and they would be Caboolture as well, absolutely. And they have a place where they can shower and be, you know, looked after. And yet they're really, really trying to find a place to live. And yet this, where I know it's bottom line stuff and there needs to be so much more in the future, like, you know, the housing needs to happen. These things are going to come incrementally over years. But what are we going to do about this situation in our communities, in this very important electorate of Longman? You know, what are we going to do about that?
Thank you. So I think 3 quick points on that. First of all, you know, what the situation you described is one of the main motivations for the tens of thousands of new social homes we're going to be building around the country. I mean, I don't think anybody here would dispute the situation that you described. That's why we're responding to that. Secondly, the Queensland State Government is, I think, not just because I'm a Queenslander, probably the best at thinking outside the square in building more homes or creating more homes for people. You know, we've been inspired, frankly, by the work of the Housing Minister and the Government, the Treasurer, you know, turning aged care homes that aren't doing aged care anymore into affordable housing, a whole bunch of stuff. Down my way, there's been a heap of it. You know, I think it's terrific, right? And that's because it recognises the situation that you described. And the third one, because you can't build a home tomorrow in a day, but we're getting cracking and we're working with the state government. But the third thing is, we don't make a big deal out of this, but we have dramatically increased the resourcing for emergency relief, the kinds of help that you described. And I wanted to shout out, probably doesn't want me to do it, but as long as I've known Anthony, and his late mum before he lost her, their family used to do the vouchers and all the rest of it. Most of what I know about that voucher program I know from Chiz and from Chiz's family. And I know how important that help is. And it shouldn't be a substitute for building homes. It shouldn't be a substitute for decent social security, but it's an important thing to get people through a tough spot. And so we have increased funding for emergency relief. We've increased funding for a whole bunch of those programs. And that's because we know that we can't leave people hanging while we build the homes. There you go. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. My question is a little more global than some of the local important issues. I want to congratulate the government on its move to do something about limiting people access to social media until they're 16. It's got some issues to try to get it in. But I'm much more worried about the effect of social media on the adult population. And I'm worried about that because really the dominance of social media is in the hands of the Murdoch press and its offshoots. And as a result, Labor has a big job to try to overcome that power to get their message out. And all the volunteers in here know how hard that is when we're trying to hand out how to votes, when we're copying all the bylines that they've picked up from Murdoch.
Yeah.
So this is more a comment and then I'd be interested in your reaction. Labor needs to work harder on combating what Murdoch is pumping out. Because until that happens, Australians and Australia as a nation are not going to find out what the really good parts of Labor's message is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with this as well. This is a huge challenge for us, and it's a huge challenge for progressive parties around the world. And to be upfront with you, I don't have all the answers to this. I mean, I think of the way that our media market is structured. I think of that Yeats poem, the centre cannot hold. It feels like that, the kind of sensible, objective commentary in the middle of politics is being hollowed out. And so there's a role for public broadcasting to fix that. There are still good journalists and still good outlets who write good, insightful pieces. Some of them still report news, some of them write columns where you learn something from. But there is a polarisation. There is a hollowing out of the middle. There is all kinds of mad stuff on social media. And the old media has more or less picked a side. Because as their market shrinks, their business model is to make people angry. Angrier and angrier, that's how they sell. And we see that right around the world. This kind of stirring up of outrage. I mean, I don't watch it, I hope nobody here does, but my understanding of what happens after 6 o'clock on Sky News is really the kind of madness we see around the world as well. And so your question or your contribution is about what do we do about it? And in our team, we spend a lot of time trying to work this out. Part of it is filling every opportunity that you can. Old media and new media. I'm not very good at the new media stuff, the social media stuff myself, personally. Some of the guys I work with are good at it, but I'm not that good at it. I don't really get it. And I'm not good at the kind of gimmicky stuff. And I'm not good at the outrage stuff. And so most of us are still trying to work out where we fit, frankly, in new media. And in old media, it's mostly just showing up. And trying to be as clear as you can and trying to be as upfront and frank as you can when you get that opportunity, whether it's on TV or radio or in interviews in the newspaper. But I don't want any of that to give you the sense that I think we've got it all in hand, because we clearly don't. Every major political party or movement around the world is grappling with this in one way or another. It changes so quickly But even if you think you've got it sold on Monday, you might not still have it sold by Friday. You've got to be nimble. But we're aware of this challenge. We know we've got to get better at it. We're putting a lot of effort into trying to work out how.
I will add to that as well, just from a party perspective. There's a reality that, particularly in places like Longman, there's massive opportunities for us in this space, and that's on the basis that, particularly in areas where voters aren't engaged, they're not engaging with traditional media. There's as many as 40% of those people who only get their news from non-traditional sources such as social media now. So in campaigns like this one, getting out on the ground and talking to people is actually how you get that message through, because they're not necessarily getting it from traditional media in the way that they used to be. So there are opportunities for us on the progressive side of politics, and hoping that on the basis that we have space that we can play in that our opponents aren't playing as aggressively.
I think that's a good additional point from Zach. I'll give you kind of two little vignettes that illustrate the point that Zach made. When I was working with Rebecca for Wayne Swan, Wayne handed down the budget, and we go into this media lock-up where all the journalists are there, and I forget what time it started, but say it's 1 o'clock. And I walk in there as an advisor at about 1:15, and I see the editor of a major newspaper, and the editor calls me over, and he shows me the front page of the newspaper the next day about the budget. And it's got this horrendous cartoon about Wayne, horrendous headline, all the rest of it. And I said, how did you work out what you thought of the budget in the 15 minutes since we gave it to you? And he said, we don't need to see the budget, mate, to know what we think about it, right? And so that's a bit of a sense of the old media, right? And fast forward that to the budget I handed down in May. That budget we handed down in May, the Conservative press had a dim view of it. You know, they thought we were giving too much cost of living help. They thought we should have cut much more harshly in the budget. They had that view. And we got a rugged time on the front page for weeks leading up to and weeks after the budget. And to be honest with you, I take that hard when we're getting when something we've worked on for so long is getting that sort of criticism, which I consider to be unfair. It worries me. But then you go out into real communities like this one or mine. I mean, nobody cares what the front of the Financial Review is in communities like this, or the Australian. And that goes to Zach's point. That is an opportunity for us. You know, in a world where readership and subscriptions for the big papers, who now have a dim view of progressive politics and progressive parties, there is a chance for us. You know, in the splintering of the media market, we've got to get great on the social media side, and we've also got to make sure that we don't trade away our biggest strength, is we've got more of you than they have of them.
And the young ones don't follow the newspapers and the news. They get their information from Reddit and places
TikTok.
like that.
Yeah. Just going to go on from there.
So now we've got time for a couple more questions.
Thanks, Jim. I want to just back this lady up here in the red jacket. You know, with our homeless, it's a really big issue here. I work, you know, for the Queensland Police, and I see where all our homeless are living. And my concern is that, you know, their payments are only about $800 a fortnight. That's not even enough to get a unit. It's probably not even enough to get a caravan. So on top of that, they've got no money left after the payment. They've got no food, electricity, transport, food, clothing. So they're really vulnerable people. They're disconnected from the community. And I think, you know, you're talking about all these homes being built. I would probably know, what are you going to do for this Moreton Bay area? You know, where are those homes? Are they going to come here for our people? How do we get them off the street? You can move them off the street, but where do they go? They just go to another place. They go into the bush. They're even sleeping around the council buildings. They're moved on. Where do they go from there? So I see here in Caboolture, it's a really big problem, big issue, and we need to move on it, and we need to help these people out. You know, they got health problems. You know, they're deteriorating with health issues. I think we should have a lot of mobiles. Maybe Queensland Health needs to get around and visit some of our people in the parks and streets and medicate them, make sure they're being looked after. Because someone's got to look after them. They can't look after themselves. They don't have any money, so, you know, they got other bigger problems through drugs and alcohol and all that. So, you know, it's a big problem, and I would like to see some changes early.
Thanks, Uncle. So I agree on health. We've got to make sure that we are reaching people rather than just waiting people to reach, governments in big hospitals. I mean, the achievement that Rebecca mentioned before in Morayfield is part of that, but not all of it. We need to get hyper-local when it comes to health. When it comes to these pressures that people are under, it's the reason why we're making medicines cheaper and reasons why we're rent assistance, 2 increases and energy bill relief and all of that sort of stuff. And on housing, yes, we need to make sure that a big chunk of the housing that we're funding finds its way and is built in communities like this one and communities like mine. It needs to be where the housing needs are most acute. And you have the best sense of that, Uncle Mick, better than I do here in this community, but I know and feel it in my own community as well. And so we work closely with Ali and her colleagues to make sure that as we're working out the planning part of all of this money, that we're both levels of government are investing in housing, that it goes where it's needed most.
Hey Jim, Liz Baker from the Woodford branch. I must say a lot of great things have come out of Wayne Swan's office. I was very young, single parent with 2 small children before Steve. And it was someone in that office, and I think it was Kevin Court actually, that told me about the job education and training program that was available at the time. And that was the only way that I could get a degree as a single parent while taking a job. We need to expand on that. We've got more and more single women becoming homeless later on in life when they don't have family supports. If they had training like I was able to get, because Wayne Swan's office told me how to, they could be teachers, they could be nurses, they could be aged care workers. They would get the training they need and the assistance they need. So that's just my comment, because from personal experience, I would never have become a teacher if it hadn't have been for Wayne Swan's office. So.
Thanks, Liz. Hey, can I take the opportunity to shout out Liz and also Steve for a long period of involvement in our movement as well. And if you could give our regards to Steve as well, a wonderful person to work with for a lot of us here in this room, and especially for me, and I think Anthony and Rebecca are in the same boat. The jet thing was a ripper, and one of the reasons why we made that big change to the single parenting payment was to make it easier for people to be able to do the training that could get the sort of jobs that we want them to get, including the job that you got. So, and to be, I remember how invested Wayne was personally in that program. And one of the things occasionally in my line of work, there's a parallel to the work that Wayne did that makes me especially proud. And so that single parent payment change, which is partly about the training opportunity, is one of the ways that we're trying to achieve the progress that you mentioned.
Jim, just a quick one. It's part of it's partially a compliment, partially a question. I should also thank you for coming out and meeting with our port workers recently at ACFS. So they were great to see you there. A bit shocked, but glad to meet you. Look, I just want to touch on the industrial relations reforms the government has done. Before the last election, we took Rebecca out to the airport a lot. It was probably ground zero for labour hire exploitation, contract exploitation, and we're so thrilled to see the government has legislated what is effectively same job, same pay. So we can't use labour hire to undercut workers. Yep. We can't pay someone $5 an hour less in the job next to them, undermine their EA and so forth. I guess the challenge we have as a union is a lot of this stuff is quite slow moving, and it does take time to prepare a really perfect case for the commission so we don't create bad precedent and so forth. I guess my question is how do we communicate to workers and the general public that we are getting wages moving and we are getting these big wins for them?
Well, I think if we work together, I think people will feel it in their pay packets and they'll understand who delivered it for them. And without your part of the movement, and without our part of the movement, people would still be getting Morrison-era wages, which were the most stagnant in a long period of time. And we know why wages were stagnant under our predecessors, because Matthias Cormann let the cat out of the bag and said weak wages growth was a deliberate design feature of their economic policy. So the difference is clear. There has been a change since we came to office, working closely with you and with the movement We're getting wages moving again. We're making sure that people keep more of what they earn with the tax cuts, which are fairer now. But we've got to make sure that when people are getting those gains in their pay packet, including from a couple of weeks from now, that they know who delivered it for them. You know, in every election campaign, and I don't know if this is the last one, Zach, but maybe if I could just kind of bring it all together. In every election campaign, as Anthony alluded to, it's partly about what we've done for people and it's partly about what we're going to do for people. It's sort of I think, roughly equal. You know, it's a bit of record and it's a bit of the future. And for us, getting wages moving again, the tax cuts, the energy bill relief, the investments in energy, all of that. You know, we've got to make sure that people are aware that without a federal Labor government working closely with a state Labor government, people wouldn't have got these gains. And not because we think that we've solved every problem in every household budget. Of course we haven't. People are under pressure. They would be under more pressure if we'd adopted the approach of our predecessors and our opponents. And so all of us, you know, in the context of the state election, in the context of the federal election, we've got to be humble about it, but we've got to be clear about it too. You know, there's a lot of people who wouldn't get anywhere near a tax cut were it not for us. A lot of people who wouldn't get anywhere near a decent minimum wage rise weren't for us, or safe rates, or same job, same pay at the airport without us. And so we've got to work out a way to do that that is humble, but which is clear.
Thank you, Jim. I think we are out of time now. I appreciate Jim taking so much time out of his schedule to be here with us. So I'd ask everyone to put your hands together. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks.
Thank you, and to show our appreciation to Jim and Anthony for being here tonight, we do have gifts for each